Hello, everyone. My name is Carol Chen, and along with other members of the LACBA President's Advisory Committee on Women in the Legal Profession, Subcommittee on Gender Bias and Civility, including Indira Cameron Banks, I am proud and excited to be bringing to you our 2021 Recorded Oral History Series. The purpose of the Oral History Series is to share the stories of women attorneys who have experienced or witnessed gender bias and instances of incivility, who have successfully addressed or navigated around such issues in their own lives. In addition to discussing their own paths, they will offer their insights on what progress, if any, they think the profession has made and what further steps the legal field should take to combat gender inequity and ensure equal opportunities and the full participation of women. We believe that all of these stories will be informative and inspirational, which is why we want to maximize accessibility to them by recording them and enabling different generations of practitioners to view them at their convenience. I myself am a Chinese American from a multi-generational immigrant family who is the first lawyer in her family. I served in the Department of Justice for over 15 years, both in the criminal and civil divisions, here in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Los Angeles, California, until recently. As someone who specialized in complex, large-scale racketeering gang, drug cartel, and money laundering cases, I often led investigative teams of up to 100 law enforcement officers and was the only woman or one of the few in the room. Indeed, I am both proud and somewhat aghast to say that I was the first female chief in office history of my section. I am proud to be part of this series so that the stories of women's triumphs and lessons learned can be shared, but I believe they also sound an alarm that more can and should be done. It is incumbent on all of us to do our part in ensuring that progress in the legal profession in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion continues, regardless of what position in the profession we hold.
I'm Indira, and I share a lot in common with Carol, who I've known for well over a decade, having started in the U.S. Attorney's Office about a year after her. Like her, I'm a first-generation immigrant and the first member of my family to become an attorney. I also served in both the criminal and civil divisions of the office and as a section chief in the office. And I remember hearing that alarm Carol's talking about, because oftentimes, especially when I was leading large financial investigations, I was struck by the fact that I was the only woman in the room during depositions, negotiations, and meetings. And so I'm always trying to do my best to ensure that that isn't the case going forward.
Well, Indira, it's clear that we share a lot of similar history. We've also, as you know, shared a lot of triumphs and lessons learned together over the course of our careers. And I'm so happy to be sharing this virtual stage with you. A few weeks ago, Indira and I moderated the inaugural session of this oral history series. We could not have been more fortunate or honored to have as our first two interviewees, Sheila Kuehl and Abby Leibman, two women who are no strangers to being firsts, as for decades they have blazed trails for the generations who have come after them and who will continue to come after them.
So Carol and I were looking forward to a particularly lively, intimate conversation with Sheila and Abby, as we're all on first name basis now. They are not just each an innovator and trailblazer in their own individual rights, but they're also longtime collaborators and friends. The two of them together exceeded all of our expectations. So in case you don't know, prior to serving as a supervisor on the now all-female LA County Board of Supervisors, Sheila was a California state senator She authored over 170 bills that were signed into law by several different governors. She served as a California Assembly member, where she was the first openly gay individual elected to the California legislature and the first woman to hold the position of president pro tempore. In addition to her numerous awards and achievements, Sheila served as the former president of WOLALA, taught at USC and Loyola law schools, and also worked in private practice after she graduated from Harvard Law School in 1978. Abby is currently the president and CEO of MAZON, a Jewish organization that is responding to the hunger crisis in America. And together with Sheila, created the California Women's Law Center in 1989 in order to advocate for and advance the civil rights of women and girls. Abby has also developed and directed the Child Care Law Project at Public Counsel, has had a successful leadership consulting practice, and served on numerous commissions and boards, receiving countless awards and accolades. And she graduated from Hastings College of Law. So, we started off our conversation with them by throwing out a quote from Madeleine Albright that we asked them to discuss. And the quote is that there is a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. I hope you enjoy hearing their response.
The Board of Supervisors of LA County is now 5 women. It's historic. It's the first time ever in 150-year history. But we have not been all together as a board in person because of the pandemic. Because Holly Mitchell was elected after we were all locked down. And so I can tell you that we miss the energy and the support. When you ask whether women support other women, it's really interesting how on the dais, we have more eye contact. We have more contact as we walk by. It is not that the men were not friendly, they were, but there's just a different style. And we are missing that energy. There is a kind of energy. And I think part of it has to do with numbers. When you look, when there's more than 5 women in a room of 11, there's much more comfort about being a woman and, saying what you think, etc., when you're not the only one. And now when you are the only ones together, that's a question I think you're probably going to get to about whether that makes a difference. But we are very supportive of each other and try to find our way to yes, which, we don't characterize things where we disagree as a war the way men did when I first joined the board. And that is also an interesting thing about, I think, how women see each other and kind of the world.
Right. But I think women lead differently. I don't think you can, this goes back to the East Coast, West Coast feminist thing, is that the idea that women and men are actually different. And whether that different comes from biology or socialization or culture, it may not even matter. The idea is that we used to punish women for being different from men, that the norm was always male, it's always a white man. And it's the idea that if you're different from that norm, there's something wrong with you and you need to try to adapt to that norm, which is what we saw women doing early, I think, in the practice of law as women moved into that sphere that was a very male dominated profession. And I sometimes look back and think about how few women there were, like even in my law school class, and how absurd that seems to the younger lawyers that I know. I do have younger lawyers on my team at MAZON. And if I say to them that, my class at Hastings had almost 30% women in it, which was a remarkable shift. That was a big deal. And this is back in the late 70s. And they just look at me like I'm insane. How could that possibly be? Because I'm older, but I don't look that old to them, I guess. And I think that as women come in to any field, I think we change it. So the question that I would have for Indira and Carol would be like, is it different for you? Because I don't know. So the only experience I've had was coming in as somebody who was a minority part of the profession. I was not represented well. And and women of color were even less represented in this profession. And I think there was a lot of not calling that out. The women themselves didn't want to draw attention to this. I think there was a need to see a shift, which I believe happened over the course of certainly the 12 years I was running the Women's Law Center, and however long, I forget when Sheila left to go become a major player in the legislature. It is that women began to be proud of the fact that they were breaking through these glass ceilings. And I would like to also say that there were some men that were really great feminists about women in the profession. There was a man named Charles Bird who, when we started the Women's Law Center, we had something Sheila created called Founders of the Law Center, and you gave, I think it was $1,000, and you had to commit to that as an annual gift, and we would list you on everything in perpetuity, whatever. And Charlie was one of the first men who said yes when Sheila asked him, and he did a presentation for us, a training. It was like a couple of hundred lawyers were there. I don't know what the heck it was. Must have been the early days of MCLE, and everybody needed that bias thing. And he got up, and the first thing he said was, "What did you do to prepare for rape today?" He said, "Now the men in this room have no idea what I'm talking about, but the women in this room will tell you that. They parked under a lamp in the parking lot to make sure that when they got out, because it would be dark, they would not be in the darkness. They carried their keys in their hand as they went." He went through this, and I've never forgotten it. And I think it was 35 years ago. I mean, it was really a long time ago. And I was so struck by that. I was so struck by his fundamental understanding that women were different. Women had vulnerabilities that men did not, and that he might not be able to experience them, but he could understand and be supportive of the women who were. And I would say that, that moment stands out as one of the positive side of people who were reluctant to think about women and advancing them and mentoring them. Because frankly, the truth is you really needed men to mentor you, or you were not going to get ahead, especially in those big firms, because that's who they were. Sorry, go ahead.
I still see a little bit of a tentativeness in new women attorneys and women professionals across a number of professions, because you are battered as you go along, and you know that you're going to be battered, and people are, the men will show more muscle, and they will be more aggressive, and they will challenge you and think that that's helping you be tough or something if they like you, or not helping you if they don't like you. And that tentativeness is still there realistically, because you have to struggle often to decide, do I want to speak up or not? Is it worth the trouble? Do I want to just leave the table? Do I want to go to that party when I know the conversation's going to be, whatever the latest case is about women, and whether the two guys at CBS ought to have been fired, and, whatever. I think that it's often I reach out to new staff members and just say, if you want to talk about this, this is an old thing. It's gotten better, but it's not great. And I want you to feel, supported. As a young woman on one of the city councils in my district, probably the first African-American woman to be on the city council. And she's under a kind of soft attack that is just constant, where she's challenged, and no one's going to say, oh, it's because you're Black or because you're a woman. But she just takes more shit than other people take, and people don't even see it. So I think it's really important for us not only to say, you need to be tougher, but I've got your back. And I
was going to say, do you think that something I've seen, and I just don't know if this is my own personal experience or if it's translated, is that I think it is very difficult for people to speak up in defense of others who are being marginalized. And in the moment when it's happening, that I mean, certainly years ago, this was true about women and other women in the room, as you mentioned earlier, Sheila, and then, men in the room, whatever. And I think it's still true. I think that we still, somebody has to break through and be that first person that says, that's wrong. Don't you call her that. Don't you say that to her. And then as soon as that happens, the dam breaks, I think, and others will do it. But I think somehow there's some fear there. I don't know where that comes from, but I do see that I think that's still true.
Well, often you were punished with the lower status of the person that you were
Right
to stand up for.
Right.
Men who stood up in the office and said, no, I really think there ought to be the ability to do family leave would suddenly be treated like the women.
Right.
And cut out of the cigar circle or whatever.
Right. Now I have something else to say that I think is very unpopular in the moment. And but I'm going to own it, that I think this, when all the Me Too movement was burgeoning, I had many friends, including my daughter, who said to me, okay, this is it. This is going to be the big breakthrough. And I rolled my eyes and I said, no, something will happen. There will be one big something that'll happen. Harvey Weinstein goes to jail. And then it'll still be the same, because we just want that magic moment. We want it to happen. And that change is so slow and it's so incremental. And we are talking about a gigantic cultural shift. That shift to even think of women as if they are people, let alone the equal of men, is huge, huge. And American culture is in some ways behind, in some ways ahead of many other cultures. I quote Sheila all the time, so I can remember a moment where somebody said, people used to bring up the culture defense around battering women, that this is their machismo, their culture. Sheila said, I don't even remember where we were, but it was this brilliant moment. She said, well, American men thought it was part of their culture too, until we told them that it wasn't. You have to stand up. And again, going back to my introduction to Sheila, this is what Sheila's good at. She's also good at disarming people by using sarcasm brilliantly, and really being accessible in what she's saying to people. Because I think that's what you have to do. That nobody hears you if you're hammering at them. And that's what you really want is, so we used to do a certain amount of good cop, bad cop kind of thing, where one of us would be the raging feminist, whatever that means. People used to tell me I was a radical feminist. And I'd be like, I don't even know what that means. That I really, really believe that men and women should be equal. I don't understand it's like, but this idea that it was radical, and it is, I think, still for many people. So I think that there's just sort of going all the way back to where we started from here with this idea that that women should help other women. I think that they do it far more openly than they used to. I still think there's reluctance. I think that there's a weird politically correct thing that happens. It's like, why should I help women and not just people who are vulnerable generally? And that what makes women special? Why should I relate to women more than I do anybody who is either inexperienced or of a community of color or some other sexual identity or whatever it might be, as if you don't have the capacity to be forward thinking and supportive for any one of those circumstances, that you aren't privileging one over the other necessarily when you speak up for any one of them, including for women. I think there's a perception that women are fine, that we arrived and everything's good.
One of the questions was about intersectionality, and which Abby just brought up in a way. And one of the ways that I've thought about it kind of recently is that each of us is an intersectionality, whatever identities we have. In the old days, I remember when I was in college, we would say, name 3 things that you are. And it was, I'm a woman, I'm a student, I'm, whatever. And
short.
we have different responsibilities about where we are. You know, if we're white, we need to take responsibility and do our piece about racism, not leave it to other
Mhm.
people. If we're women, we need to understand the vulnerabilities and do what we can to, you know, support and bring up issues about and with other women. And if we're LGBTQ, we
Mhm.
need to understand our role and our role with trans people. And it's just different. Sometimes we're in the majority and sometimes we're in the minority and sometimes, but it's all, you know, in
Mhm.
us. And I
But
think
I
it's,
also think that some women, you and I, for example, we have a greater responsibility to speak out because other people look to you and think that no matter where we are now, what we have been and done, we're in a place that we signaled we have leadership. We are leaders. We are, I mean, you really are. I mean, you're an elected leader, which is the way we actually embrace real leadership. And I'm reminded, I don't remember this, Sheila, but Sheila and I used to go to the movies a lot together. And we went to see Enchanted April. Do you remember this, Sheila?
yes, I
I
sure
don't know
do.
if anybody watching this is going to remember this movie. It was a great movie. And we came out of the theater and Sheila said, "Did you like it?" I said, "Yes." "Did you?" And she said, "Oh, yeah." And I said, "You know, feminists aren't supposed to like this movie because the ending is they all end up, you know, in love and happily ever after." And she looked at me and she said, "But you liked it, didn't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I loved it." She goes, "Well, so did I," which just goes to show you feminists love this movie. And this was the first moment I realized I had power and I had influence because and we used to get called by the press and they, "What do women think?" I'm like, who am I to say what women think? I don't know. But that moment I went, oh my God, I can and do define what feminists think. And so if I manage to keep that in mind now and say, I mean, I have a title that makes me a leader. My staff looks to me and wants me to signal where we are and what we do and what we support. And I have to own that still. There's a lot of responsibility in that. There's a lot of power. I mean, I think that there are people who are, you know, junior in their career that long for that moment when they are the ones who get to say, yes, you can have dessert for every meal. There's a real burden that comes with that, of having to be thoughtful all the time. So I set a culture at MAZON that's radically different from my male predecessors, radically different. And it is not my personal, this isn't what Abby always feels or thinks. It is what I, as Abby, see as the best culture for an organization like this one. It's the kind of culture I want to work in, but it isn't my personal beliefs necessarily. And it's really hard to manage that. And it was especially hard at the Women's Law Center, where your work, your ideology, and your personal life were all merging in the same space. And I think that for people who do advocacy around issues or communities or populations of which they are a part, that merger is an ever-present challenge. We won't call it a danger, but I think it's a challenge. I have no idea how I got off on this. Do you, Sheila? How did I go this?
No, but I was thinking maybe they have a second question.
Oh, that, yeah. Oops.
You know, I have one sort of follow-up on this
Oh,
topic,
look.
and then we'll jump to the other one, which is you guys are amazing, and now you can own all the experiences that have happened to you, and you can label it and identify what it is. And I think there are a lot of women, as you pointed out, they're going to law school. More than 50% of the classes are, you know, comprised of women, and they start out in practice and things happen to them, and they're not necessarily going to attribute it to the fact that they're a woman. And you know, even close to 20 years of practice, right? Even I have changed in more leaning in and owning, you know, the circumstances that are happening as opposed to shying away from it. And I'm sure Carol has stories of the same. So what do you say, looking for you guys, looking back, but looking down really to sort of the new generation of lawyers who are, maybe more than 50% women right now graduating from law school. What do you say to them? Did you always know that from the beginning that something was happening to you because maybe somebody had a perception of you? I mean, what do you say to those women who might be confused about what's happening and might be internalizing it? And I can say there's always strength in seeking out other women that are going through that same experience, because when you talk, you realize. But what do you guys have? Do you have any advice to sort of share in that regard?
I think the issue of self-doubt has always been a difficult one, and women are sort of bred to doubt themselves because men want to have their opinion be the one that is taken. So I say to them, in true Shakespearean fashion, to thine own self be true, and it shall follow as the night the day. Thou canst not then be false to anyone. You have to listen to your own voice. What you're hearing is true. You are not crazy. You are not wrong. You are not, certainly not wrong for yourself. The issue for me always has been, then what? Do you call people out and then be characterized, as an angry woman? I know certainly the Black women I know are always characterized as angry Black women. And I think I'd be angry too. And I've been angry in my life. When I first went to the legislature and I was the first openly gay person there, it was sort of like, how do I be? Everyone thought I was only going to bring bills that related to gay people. And you bet your life I brought bills related to gay people, but everything else too, other kinds of civil rights, housing, water, there's so much you can do. So what I say to them is, try not to care so much about what other people are saying to you or thinking. It doesn't make you insensitive. You're plenty sensitive. You need to be, treat yourself like your own best friend. It's not a sad thing. It's a good thing. If you're unhappy where you are, leave. It's not always easy, whether it's a job or a marriage or whatever it is. Prepare, think about it, and you deserve happiness. So it's the inner voice that I encourage them to listen to. And the other thing is to seek out, colleagues, just to have drinks with friends or whatever. It's really important because you get that kind of affirmation. Abs?
I don't know if I have anything to add to that. I think that I would say the same. I mean, I can remember my own experiences of thinking that there was something wrong with me just as a person that had nothing to do with my gender, until others said to me, well, of course that's happening. Because, when I did interviews in law school to get just a clerk position, I could have wallpapered a room with my rejection letters. I couldn't understand it because my classmates were all getting offers, and I knew that my ranking was higher than theirs. I knew that I hadn't choked in the interview, and I couldn't understand it. I thought there was something wrong with me. And it actually took somebody else, I don't remember who it was, who said to me, you get that it's the guys that are getting this. It's because you're a woman. And I thought, oh, that can't be true. Not at this day and age, and so I don't even remember doing anything about it, except it made me feel better. And it may have made me more passionate about pursuing a career path that had to do with change for women. So I think that's the other thing you can do. It's like the now what is, maybe that means that you channel some energy into that, or that you help the next woman see that she's not crazy, that's all we're really looking for, right? Is that affirmation, that the idea that we didn't make this up, and that the law can only do so much to recognize what's wrong here. You can't sue someone for looking at you funny. You can't sue someone because they independently decided they didn't want to hire you and all these other people didn't. There's no pattern or practice there for multiple law firms. So, and then the other thing is the intersectionality of the law doesn't protect at all. So, I mean, we've seen recent issues about violence against Asian American women. And I know it is because they are Asian American women, that it's those two things together that really has contributed to the hate crime and the violence, and that the law has no way of recognizing that right now. And so it parses it and says, oh, there's nothing here. So the law isn't going to help you. It is, unless you begin to push it to change the law, right? So it's your own experience. We always tend to discount anecdotal experience. I guess that's what I want to say. And that we should not. That anecdotal experience is the beginning of the gathering of statistical information and data that supports a change. And if you can't get that next step, it doesn't matter. That's where you do the pound the table thing. I mean, you just look for an anecdotal piece of information that truly supports it. And I actually think the more you articulate that, here was my experience. Did you have this experience? You will hear more of that. And I don't, it would make me sad to think that it's still struggling in isolation around this. So my hope is that this is where you find others who step in and say, nope, didn't make it up. That it shouldn't only be people like Sheila. We shouldn't have to look to somebody who's a remarkable leader. We should think all of us have that capacity to say, I see you.
The thing is, you shouldn't invite in the negative stuff. I mean, with Facebook and everything else that's going on. I mean, I made a rule every time I ran for office from the very beginning, and my staff and my campaign were nonplussed or amused. And that was, I don't want to see any negative campaigning against me. Don't send me an email that says, you've got to see what they just said about you. Or show me, the ad that my opponent's about to release. I don't want to see it. My rule was, just like from the Wiz, don't you bring me no bad news. And I really was adamant about it. And my staff had to be told over and over. But the reason is, you're helping to destroy yourself. It's like, yeah, bring it on. Go on, hit me again. I'm here for it. Just dump on me. No, you don't have to listen to that, because the truth is, they're wrong. They're just wrong. There's something wrong with them that they're doing this. As Abby said, we used to think as young people, there must be something wrong with me, but there was a transition and we understood, nope, there's something wrong with them. And that's what I say to young women. If you can internalize that, there is something wrong with them, not with you. It's not you, but they really want you to think it's you. So don't let in all that, stuff that they're pouring into Nextdoor or whatever the hell. Don't even read it. Don't
hate Nextdoor.
Ask for it. I mean, delete.
Right.
Change your email address. I don't care what you do. Just avoid it.
Yeah. That's excellent advice.
All right, Indira, I think we should probably try to go to the second topic because this has been so great and we can just talk about this forever. So both Sheila and Abby, you have already touched upon some of this, but I want to sort of throw out a second quote, which is that Shirley Chisholm once famously said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. I know that it's not only one of my own favorite quotes, but also Indira loves it too. And it's something that we've really taken to heart and tried to do in our own careers, which is we constantly talk to each other about trying to create opportunities and be really proactive and intentional in fighting for ourselves in our careers. And as I mentioned earlier, and I don't care what you say, Abby, but you are a trailblazer.
Okay.
Well, it's interesting.
Including work.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, go ahead, Sheila.
Just in the paper this morning, the president of the European Commission was at a meeting in Turkey, and the head of the Turkish government and the man who was the head of the European something else that's equal to the commission, And the three of them walked into a room and there were two chairs. And the two men immediately sat down. She's the president of the European Commission. And she waited for them to bring another chair. Another chair was not forthcoming. So she sat on a small couch nearby and participated in the meeting. But that is the problem with a folding chair. It's a good thing to say, I want a chair at this table.
Mm.
I will have a chair at this table, even if I have to bring it myself and turn over the trash can and sit on it. But I would first say, where's my chair? We need another chair in this room.
Right.
Who's heading up this meeting? Mr.
Right.
President, we need another chair in this room.
Right.
It is often we think, well, maybe it's not my place. And, you know, I have done my share of being quiet and not knowing whether it's appropriate to speak up in very fancy rooms.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Shirley was saying, whatever, you know, pull up to the table.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I would encourage people to modify that quote for themselves to demand a chair from the very beginning and see what happens. If they've been invited to the meeting, they're seen as an equal.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah,
Sheila, just to follow up on that. So what happens when you actually don't even get invited to the meeting?
That's what I was going to say.
Right.
Yeah.
What do you do? Because both of you clearly have fought for seats successfully at the table, but surely both of you have also fought for it unsuccessfully. So what do you say to the young women out there who are trying to be leaders in their own right and very early on in their career? How do you get that invite, or do you just push open the door to, you know, force yourself into that meeting?
Your turn, Ab.
Oh, crap. I don't, you know, here's the thing. This is where the meeting metaphor chairs like sort of falls apart, right? I mean, it's not, this is, the idea is that you're trying to say, I don't want to be excluded from that arena in which I feel I have a role to play that should be just as equal. So that, you know, the thing I didn't like about the folding chair metaphor always was that the other people are sitting in armchairs or conference room, and I'm in a folding chair, which already suggests that I'm less than. And that's the thing I fought against. I mean, you know, I'm short, I'm blonde. I really didn't present as a power figure just by my physical presence. And to come into a room and want to assert yourself. I mean, I use my law degree a lot of the time to do that. I mean, I'd be in rooms with, you know, men who were, you know, administrators of school districts or athletic directors or law enforcement officers. And I would just make sure I said I was a lawyer, which always scares everybody. Can't get around that. It's really awesome. That I think this question is very complicated for me about the idea of what to say to young women about it, because there's some level at which you have to appreciate that you've got to have a certain degree of experience. You've got to understand what you want. Why is it you're trying to get in there? Just so you can say you got in, or do you have something you want to contribute? Is this going to move things forward for you, for what you're working on? Why do you need to be there? You don't want to, I mean, look, well, I don't know if this still happens when you're in a room full of people are introduced and then all the men are referred to as Mr. So-and-so and they call you by your first name. I bet you, Sheila, that people instantly feel comfortable using your first name, where if you were a man, they would call you Supervisor. Although at this point, I think you've like established some of those important barriers. I mean, that's a barrier we want to put up, right? Is to say, I'm not your friend.
People with titles to call me anything but supervisor now. So it's like,
yeah,
you know, no, you're the governor of Arkansas. You can call me Sheila, you know,
right.
Whatever.
You actually talked to that? Never mind. Well, you know, I always feel it's my place, my right to say, you may call me Abby. I don't want anyone to assume that. You know, and I think that I mean, I do have younger people on my staff, we'll call them less experienced in the workforce, I don't know, who want to run before they walk. and sort of mentoring them to get to this place. This doesn't suggest that you are less than, or I don't respect you, or that you don't have this potential, but I want you to grow into it. So that's what so Carol, I don't know how to say, like, how do you break into the room? I mean, look, if there really was something important happening and I had this experience as the head of a Jewish organization. I mean, MAZON does work to end hunger among people of all faiths and backgrounds, but Jews are a minority in this country. And there are times when we are not included in conversations where others are. And I always tell my director of communications, like, call it anti-Semitism. Let's call it. And she's like, we can't do that. Okay. So we don't do that. But we can make a noise publicly about, here was this meeting. There were all these folks who talked about it. This is our work. We should be in that room. Sometimes that doesn't work. It just sounds like sour grapes. But I think that that's part of it. You use, what is the other strategy outside the room? So, I mean, certainly when we did our work on women's rights issues, this was often what we had to do. We weren't going to get in the room and be able to actually have these conversations where we needed to have them. So we had them outside the room. I don't know if that's comforting at all.
Well, I think it depends on what is the meeting for. I mean, is somebody really equal to me invited and I'm not? Like all the partners except for me, well, okay, then you have to say, I hear there's a partners meeting, and walk in.
Yeah.
And you know, it's hard and it's embarrassing. I don't think it happens among those kinds of equals anymore. Some of it is strategy, and they don't think of you as a part of a strategy to accomplish something. And I think what I say to younger women is, you have to really understand, when you call a meeting, does everyone you've invited have something to gain from the meeting or something to give at the meeting? It's not just automatically, you know, that's part of being a CEO too,
right?
Where you don't just have an all staff meeting when only 3 people really need, you know, to strategize on something and explain, you know, anybody else can show up, but you're not required, kind of thing. And that's a culture piece as well. So I think we have to ascertain, what is the meeting for? Is someone completely equal to me going to the meeting, and I should be there too, not just because I'm supposed to show up like showing my colors, but that they need me and I need to be there.
Well, okay, is there still though not a possibility that, like, I don't know what equal means in this context, like that we're the same, whatever, because, you know, we already know that if women are starting 2 steps back, then their title, their options, whatever, may already be diminished, even though they themselves should be seen as a peer of this group, and only they can see that. And how do they push that through? Right. I mean, I think I also think there's still this lingering thing of you're not really qualified. You got in a tokenism way. And I think this is probably particularly true for women of color, that and probably men of color too, that the idea that they cheated, that somebody gave them a leg up just because of their status, and that they're not as good. Now, my perception comes from the other way around. I think that, wow, a woman of color has managed to become an attorney. She must be something else, because it's so many barriers that are explicit, implicit, you know. But that's what I think this is hard, Sheila, is that there's a room, all of the partners have been invited, but you're the one who's done all the work and you're the one with all the information, but they won't let you in that door because you don't have that title partner. And who's the one who's going to say, oh, wait, Sheila needs to be here? And sometimes it falls on you to be the one to say, I think I should be there. And
well, you know, 2 other things too, Abs. One is the feeling of being a fraud yourself.
Yes.
Many people have said, I don't exactly know how I got to do this. I'm afraid tomorrow they're going to discover that I don't really know as much as they think I know. And of course, men were taught from the very beginning, many of them, not all of them, to just have a bravado front, you know, what we called male answer syndrome, which is a real thing, where somebody asks a question and you just pull together everything you know in your head and propose an answer. You're not saying that it's right. women would not propose an answer unless they think it's right.
Yeah.
So that fraud syndrome. The other thing is, I really want to say to young women in the profession, any kind of lawyer, run for office, because you will then be in the room where it happens,
Yeah.
as Hamilton told us, and you will be there. And then, of course, there's a whole different thing about women saying, oh, well, I don't know people with a bunch of money. Well, I didn't either, but I knew a bunch of people with a little money.
Yeah.
And I asked every single one of them to give me money. And Abby knows this. When she was talking about the founders, it was like, think of everybody you know, you went to elementary school with them, ask them for money. And then you will have a seat at the table because you're in a room of 40 state senators and you're one of them. And there will be problems too. You may not get to be speaker, or you may not get to chair the banking committee, and you have to fight wherever you are, but at least you'll be in the room where it happens.
So I want to follow up on what Abby did bring up, this idea, right, that even when you are a woman and you find yourself in a seat, whether it's a folding chair or a more permanent armchair, at the meeting, at the table, and there is this perception, right, that what is this woman doing here? It's some sort of undeserved promotion or some sort of position. And sort of brings up a quote from Serena Williams, which was, what she said was, luck has nothing to do with it, because I've spent many, many hours, countless hours on the court working for my one moment in time, not knowing when it would come. And so to the both of you, both Sheila and Abby, do you believe women do have to work harder than men to achieve the success they have? And that while men can make mistakes without as much consequence, women do have to strive for perfection in order to be taken seriously. And the corollary of that, which is, both of you have talked about it, I think Sheila, you especially talked about it, this idea that you have, not just when you're in a position of power as a woman, you also feel a tremendous sense of responsibility. Because, for example, if you failed, the consequence might transcend yourself. You actually are failing for almost your entire, group of other people. So can you both speak to whether or not you think it's getting better, or do you think women still really do have to work harder to achieve either the same level of success or even just half the level of success? And also whether or not women, are we getting it right? Are we working harder at the expense of working smarter? So there's a lot there for all of you, to both of you, to unpack, but I wanted to throw it out there so you can basically go wherever direction you want.
I have to say yes. And that's it. Yes, yes, I do think that women, all you have to do is just look at the recent hearings about Biden's cabinet nominations, and just like sort of a stark reminder of the kinds of things that they will ask of women that they won't ask of men, the cynicism. And again, this goes back to that the issue that Sheila was talking about. If you think it is, then it probably is, right? You look at it and you think, why are they giving her such a hard time? And you think, it's because she's a woman and she's a woman of color, and they're not going to ask other people. They wouldn't. I mean, Tom Vilsack sailed through, for crying out loud. He's the one old white dude that, that doesn't mean Tom's a bad guy. I mean, he's a good enough guy. But yes, I think that women still have to work hard. I actually think there's all kinds of interesting fallout from the idea that we recognize that people have both a personal life and a professional life. And the work-life family thing, I think there's backlash around that. That there's now a presumption that women will need to do both of those things, where we still don't presume that men have to strike that balance, and that it's on the woman to figure out how to do that. I still think that's true. I'm not sure that's where you wanted to go with this, but I'm certain that it's still And I don't know, Sheila, I'm just not as evolved as you are, because I still think that, yes, I smoke and mirror, somebody is going to find out that I really, sort of lucked into where I'm at, and that my experience and my skills are not the only reason I'm here. And, I hide that really well, by the way, just so y'all know. But I'm certain that I'm not the only woman executive who looks around and says, somebody is going to take this away from me.
Well, imposter syndrome is a really real thing.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, there wouldn't be a human being alive that would agree with what you just said about, anybody's going to take it away from you, or you're lucky to be there, or whatever the hell.
We haven't talked about my mother yet, though, that way.
That's true, but mothers are different,
Yes.
Although mine, I really lucked out, and my mother was kind of overpraising in many ways. And that's also what gave me such great confidence. Like, yes, of course I'm fine and wonderful. I do also, how can I say, I'm not sure about women having to work harder. I guess I don't feel they have to work harder, but I think they perceive that they have to work harder, which are two kind of different things. And in many cases are just much more prepared. But it's different. When I was in the legislature, I served with 79 other people in the state assembly. And, there were 30 of us who were, over the course of time, committee chairs. And I found that some of the men just skated through. They didn't really prepare. They just felt like their staff would give them the agenda. They would do the agenda and kind of ask questions as it occurred to them. Others, like me, but like Darrell Steinberg, for instance, would take a long time preparing to chair Judish and really try to understand, all of the issues. And it wasn't really a woman-man thing in the legislature. It was more about whether you were smart and really wanted to do your job. I don't know whether Elizabeth Warren is the smartest person in the room because she over prepares as a woman, or whether she's just the smartest person in the room and she can't help herself from learning everything. Or if Heather Cox Richardson writes her column every day, which is a history lesson every day, and says, oh, I'm a woman, I have to have all the facts in line, or whether she's just a really fine historian. So I guess my message to women would be, you don't have to work harder than the men. You just have to work up to your own capabilities and don't disappoint yourself. Be as prepared as you think you should be. And you will succeed, because if you sit through any kind of committee hearing in the legislature, in the audience, you will say, that's a doofus, that's a doofus, that's really smart, that's really smart. That person is not real smart, but totally prepared because they know they're not real smart. That's a doofus. You just know, and that's your reputation. You're lazy, or you work a lot.
So I don't know. I have sort of a different sensibility, not perhaps around the law per se, but I think about my children who are young adults. And my son's a social worker. He's an MSW, LCSW, which is a highly unusual thing for a young man. But the ranks of social workers are dominated by women. And he got, he would say something that every other social worker would say, and people were like, oh my God, you're amazing. Now, I think he's amazing. I do. But he also would acknowledge that he's not doing anything different from his colleagues, but because he's a guy and he's doing it, he was lifted up as this great example. On the other hand, my daughter, who's a writer and works in Hollywood and works in a very male-dominated environment, and she does feel like she has to prove herself over and over. Now, she doesn't because of her personality. She had the kind of mom Sheila did. So she thinks she can do everything. She gets crushed when she doesn't get something she wants, but it's really fascinating for her she worked as a writer and story editor on WandaVision, where the head of that writer's room was a woman, which for Marvel was a really big deal and a really big change. So there's a glass ceiling that's only just being, and I'm pretty confident that her boss felt like she had to really knock it out of the park, because if WandaVision had failed, the whole discussion would be about women can't write this stuff. Women can't do it. You know, it's not going to work, and they don't understand this universe. And yet it also got praised because she brought a different sensibility into that room, right? It's a much softer experience. Now, you know, the Marvel stuff tends, I mean, I don't know if I have to get into this analysis, but it tends to be softer, but it's an interesting metaphor for what we're talking about, where it was done differently. But if it had failed, she would have been blamed. And I don't know where the glass ceilings exist in the law anymore. I really don't know. I mean, there are women on our state Supreme Court. There are more, you know, more than one. And there's, you know, we've had women as Chief Justice, and we have women who are heads of bar associations, and luckily the biggest criminals aren't women, but we have some lawyers who are earning their stripes as not the best. We have women in the legislature who are lawyers who went down that path. I mean, I think Sheila is absolutely right. I mean, lawyers are a natural part of the legislature because it's lawmaking, right? It's the other side of the experience. Women like me who are CEOs in the nonprofit sector, fewer women who are CEOs in the for-profit sector, but even there, I don't know where they exist. I know they still must. And I know some places it's newer. So the breakthrough doesn't feel solid yet. And I think, Sheila, that one of the privileges that you have of having 5 women on the board of supervisors is that this is a done deal. There's no way anyone could ever argue that a woman cannot be on our board of supervisors. I mean, that's it. We're done. And women of color that are part of that. The diversity there is fabulous. And you know, a year ago, they said it couldn't be done. I mean, I don't know, but it's so new. And I can't speak for what the whole profession is doing now, even the profession within Los Angeles is doing now. But I know that there are women who feel that they are getting left out, that sometimes they can't tell why, but then they have an instinct that it's because they're a woman, and they don't know what to do about that. They don't know how big a noise to make. They don't know how to make that noise. They don't know where to go for the support. I mean, I think that women's bar associations are really important in that regard. I would not ever in a million years be where I am now if I hadn't been a part of the Women Lawyers Association of LA, because I wouldn't really have cemented my friendship with Sheila. I wouldn't have met Jennifer McKenna, which is the 3rd person we started the Women's Law Center with. I wouldn't have had a support system. I wouldn't have had a safe place to have arguments, like really intense arguments about issues. And then the meeting's over and everybody's going, hey, we're going next door to get a pita. Do you want to come? This is how I learned how to be a lawyer, that it wasn't personal. It is about the issue and the work. So you can have a knockdown, drag out argument, and then later you go and socialize together. And I think the legislature used to be more like that, Sheila. I'm not so sure elected stuff is that way anymore, but
it's difficult for them now with the pandemic because it's harder to form, you know, those bonds. And I do hear some of those problems. And also it's so partisan.
That's what I was thinking.
In especially in Congress, and that's very difficult for them. But I think your question about whether women have to work harder, I think we would agree that we feel we do. That makes it real. Yeah. And frankly, the bottom line for me is it's never a bad thing to work hard, to be prepared. Especially as an attorney, you're taught, have your facts together, know the law, and bring them all together and push. So I do think that you are rewarded in many ways for, good and solid work. You will be well thought of. You will be then possibly promoted, but there's always discrimination, and there always will be. So I don't think this is going to be old when people are watching this in 100 years, if there's still the ability to watch this kind of technology and it's not just like another floppy disk that you don't know what to do with.
Exactly.
Microfiche.
So I want to kind of bring us full circle with two quotes. And one of the things, I think, Abby, you had said it, whether, you can be a lawyer or you are a woman lawyer, right? And there is a perception generally of what a lawyer should be or shouldn't be, and how a lawyer should act. And then there is a perception of how a woman lawyer should be or shouldn't be. And I think it's also how a woman leader should be or shouldn't be. And, one of the things I'm going to read you the quotes, but does that evolve over the course of a woman lawyer career or a lawyer's career? And, I want to get your perception on whether or not there are penalties imposed on women who become lawyers. So the two quotes from women, notable women in very different areas. Okay, so the first quote is by Madonna. And she said, "I'm tough, ambitious, and I know exactly what I want. If that makes me a bitch, okay." The second quote we have is from Jacinda Ardern. And she says, "One of the criticisms I've faced over the years is that I'm not aggressive enough or assertive enough, or maybe somehow because I'm empathetic, I'm weak. I totally rebel against that. I refuse to believe that you cannot be both compassionate and strong." And so, I'd like you to talk about that. Strength, tough, ambition, those are things that usually are used to describe a lawyer. But at some point, does that become a penalty against women who are lawyers? And so I have 1,000 questions, but I'm sure you guys have a lot maybe to say on that, especially, I do want to start out with, as you've aspired to become leaders, have there been points in time that that's been held against you to be openly ambitious?
Sheila?
I think, well, there's a lot there. First of all, sticks and stones can break my bones, but names will never hurt me. So they can call you biatch or whatever they want to call you. It's like, you've got a problem, bub. And I think that is the bottom line advice that I would give everyone. It's like, you can try to modify your behavior in order to get people not to call you names. It's not going to work. The second thing is, my experience is different in a way. I'm a dyke. Did I embrace that word? Certainly not at first, because, we had all these conversations in the community about whether everybody was butch enough or they were too butch, or lipstick lesbians and femmes. And oh my God, it was just completely gender-based. And finally, the feminists in our community, including Ivy Bettini, may her soul rest in peace, because she just passed away and was so important, was like, why are you embracing these gender tropes, when you're the ones fighting against it? But I was given permission as a dyke to be more confident, to be more whatever they perceived, not exactly mannish, but to have more attributes, not to have to be feminine, and therefore no men would want to date me. It was like, please don't want to date me. I just, that won't work. Can we just be friends? But I think that no matter what you do, you will be criticized. It's kind of like there is no, in the Three Bears, it's either too much or too little. No one is going to ever say to you, just right. So you just need to find your own comfort zone, what you are, how strong you are. Let it come out. Don't hide anything. Don't hide your light under a bushel. Don't, pretend that you're not as strong as you are. Don't lose the race because you think it's going to hurt his feelings. Just really honestly be who you are for yourself. It's not selfish. And that, I think, is the most important thing I would say, because they're going to call you names no matter what. And it doesn't matter. Characterize yourself.
Yeah, it's funny because it just reminds me, I had an experience about this is sort of circling back to some of the earlier stuff we talked about women and supporting women. I was in a meeting with a bunch of women about a women's issue. And I got told that I was too aggressive in the meeting. I also was a part of a leadership team for a collection of nonprofit organizations and got told that I was too aggressive in that meeting. And there's probably a time in my career where I would have really been hurt by that, and I would have internalized it and felt terrible. And at a certain point in your career, certain age, whatever, in the latter instance, I said, then I don't want to be a part of this group. If what I was doing is too aggressive, you don't want me here and I don't want to be here. Because all I was doing was articulating what I think is the best course of action. And if people don't want to hear that, and if they need me to agree with them all the time, I'm the wrong person for this. You don't want me here. I didn't come into this to just guess everybody. In the other circumstance where it was people, some of them people I've known for a while, as in 40 years, I really was shocked because I thought I hadn't been anything other than just like everybody else in the room. And I only knew it. So one person told me that I was this way afterwards, but in the meeting, I had to get up and go put money in my parking meter. And the young woman who was the intern following all of this conversation walked out with me because I don't remember why. Anyway, and she said to me, God, you're amazing. You just like came in and took over and did. I'm like, I did? I really didn't think I really had no self-awareness. So I think that this is a part of what happens as you age. I became comfortable with who I am. This is just who I am. And I had a really fun experience last week. We had a meeting with leadership at U.S. Department of Agriculture, which is a big deal when you're in the anti-hunger business. And the woman who's now the head of Food and Nutrition Service in the Biden administration is somebody we worked with a long time. And I said at the beginning of the conversation, you know, it feels so great to be able to be with people that we have experience with and we know, and so we can just be comfortable. And she said, oh, come on, Abby, in what meeting have you ever been where you haven't been totally yourself? And I went, whoa, okay, I have a reputation. I'm cool with that reputation. I'm fine with it. There was probably a time when I was not, and probably when I worked with Sheila would be able to tell you stories of when I was not. And I would come back crushed from being told that I was too aggressive, too bombastic, too critical, too confrontational, whenever they put that TOO in front of whatever they're about to say, you know, you're going to get it. And I experienced this with both men and women. I did it in professional and, you know, avocational experiences. And there was a time when it really wounded me. I mean, it doesn't anymore. I'm aware of it still. I hear it. But I also think I'm not going to change. And I think that that is part of what I hope Sheila would agree with, is that you've got to own who you are. You don't want to be a jerk, but it doesn't matter what they call you. You have to internalize and know, no, I'm not being a jerk, and I'm not making an argument just to hear myself talk. I really believe this and I feel passionately about it so that your strength comes out. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
I also think that, you know, with 5 women on the board now, I think a lot about compassion and empathy, and a lot of things that women exhibit more than men as a whole. Not every woman and every man, but these are a very, very good thing in the law, and a very, very good thing in governing. The law is supposed to be fair. Fairness has to do with, in many ways, with empathy, which means understanding directly, not sympathy, where I'm outside, you know, seeing that you're hurting, but really understanding directly, what is it? We're not getting enough vaccines to communities of color. We don't say, oh, I don't know that that's true. We say, I get that that's true, and we're getting more out tomorrow. So I think that those are very, if they're seen as feminist, you know, things that we exhibit, so be it. That's good. And it is a wonderful way to govern and a good way to really think about the law, I think.
I used to run a program that was a leadership program in the Jewish community. I did it for 8 years as a consultant, and we talked a lot about what the qualities of leadership were. And now at MAZON, when we call on Congress to do something, we always call on them to use both wisdom and compassion. And I've never really considered until this moment that, I mean, these are my words, and I haven't really considered that they're coming from this place of how I want to myself lead, and that they're probably a part of my persona. I mean, I can't separate out which one of my personas this comes from, but I see it as a critical way to lead and to be in the world. I can't say that I am unaware of the fact that as a woman, there may be some expectations about how I will be in a public setting. When I do testimony, when I am speaking in public, I try not to get emotional all the time. I use it. So, true confessions here. I use that. I know if I have that moment where if I tear up, I'm going to have an impact because I don't do it very much. So I'm conscious about that. I've had real challenges in my personal life around loss, and my children are actually my niece and nephew, and my twin sister was murdered by her husband, and then my younger sister died of cancer a few years later, and I raised these two little people as my own. And when I talk about them and I talk about what it means to be a single mother, I allow myself to get somewhat emotional so that people can see this is very real for me. And I had all kinds of privilege going into this, right? I'm white. I had a tremendous community of friends. I had a good job. I had the ability to have flexible hours in my job. Most women who are single mothers don't have that. And I allow that in some of these circumstances because I don't want anyone to think that I am not touched by this. But there are other moments when I'm feeling very emotional about things, when we talk about people who are experiencing crushing poverty at this moment, and they don't see any way out, and people are blaming them. And I want to weep for them. But if I do, I will lose my audience, and I can't risk it. So there are still these moments where I'm going to temper what I see as my natural instincts, whether they come from being a woman or just who I am. I don't know, but I have to moderate that. So it's a balancing act all the time. But there's an ability at a certain age where you simply say to yourself, this is what you get. This is who I am. And I'm okay with that. And I hope most women don't have to wait until they're in their 60s to get there, because really it would have been a gift to be this way in my 40s.
No kidding. Unfortunately, I have to say goodbye soon because it's a work day.
Mm-hmm. What? Huh? How can you tell?
So I've really enjoyed this, and I hope that you have too. And I agree. When Abby and I are interviewed, we could do a 10-hour interview and still think of new things to say. But thank you very, very much for doing this. I think it's really important, all of the interviews that you do, and saving this for people to be able just to access.
Ditto.
I will say, Sheila, Abby, for me personally, thank you so much for spending the important time that with us today. Obviously, both of you are very busy, but both of you are also very inspirational in your stories, but also more importantly for me in your messaging to a lot of the women out there. And I love the frank conversation and just really being candid and personal. So thank you very much.